Welcome to Let's Thrive Postpartum.
Lo, welcome so much to Let's Thrive Postpartum. We are so excited to have you here today and have our moms learn all about what you're doing and your expertise.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little about yourself and why you started the Labor Mama?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. First of all, I love this space, both pregnancy, labor, birth, and postpartum. So it's a pleasure to be here. The
Yeah.
Labor Mama. So I'm by trade or by education, I am a registered nurse. And so I worked at the bedside for a while. And it is 100% my passion. I fell in love with OB very quickly. I thought I wanted to do that or oncology care while I was in school, partly impacted because I had a mother going through cancer while I was in school. And so the oncology stuff was really beautiful to me, albeit really hard as well, obviously.
Yeah.
But I loved people, I loved families, I loved the impact kind of that like healthcare and nurses could have on families. And so I think you make an impact no matter what realm of nursing you go into. But I just really thought those were really tangible places to really be like with these families and stuff. So I got lucky. I got a job in OB straight away as a new grad, and I worked LDRP, which means you do labor, delivery, recovery, and postpartum. So basically took care of people from 15 weeks coming in with an issue all the way until, delivery, postpartum, sending them home. And so that was a cool way to learn. I got to truly do everything, learn about the full aspect, right, of being pregnant and then going home. When I had my first daughter, my mom unfortunately passed away a couple months later. And so I ended up not going back to the bedside at that time. I wanted to be with her so that she passed away a little bit after my maternity leave would have ended. Wanted to be with her. Obviously, needed to take care of myself and my new baby. And so I left the bedside at that time. Took a long while for me to put myself back together, to be honest, which we will probably get into a little bit. And then I was bored. So I quickly had 2 under 2, but I was still really bored, and I missed this passion of my life, which was women, their families, and all their stories. And so I kind of started just like sharing things on Instagram, started just blabbering about all the things I love so much, and people started to listen. And so I think like a lot of people during those COVID-y years, like kind of jump online to look for community or to talk or whatever.
Mhm.
And yeah, it just appeared that people wanted to listen. And so from that, kind of the Labor Mama as a true business and community was born. And so at this point, I have online birthing classes, postpartum newborn class, and a breastfeeding class. I'm also a certified lactation consultant. So the breastfeeding class as well. Have the social media platforms where I just educate like for free.
Yeah.
So it just kind of was something that organically happened. It wasn't something I expected, but because I had left the bedside, but also had to leave a passion I really loved because of life and motherhood. This has been a really cool way to still be in something and kind of be able to hold both motherhood and, loving on and helping families. And so that is how we got here.
Oh, I love that. And I'm a therapist. I work a lot with moms, and we know that their labor experiences and birth experiences have a really big impact on their mental health outcomes afterwards. A lot of the time, it's just one of the many laundry list of factors. But what do you see when you're working with moms in terms of like helping them prepare for labor? Like, what does that look like? What do you see that helps, that is kind of protective of a mom retaining, I guess, kind of her autonomy or her ability to advocate for herself? Like, what does all that look like? How important is it?
Yeah. So one of the cool things about doing these courses and stuff online now is I kind of get to help people before they're at my bedside. Because obviously as a nurse, you kind of only see them when it's time, right? So
Yeah.
you're hoping, oh, I hope you did the things that will help you, show up better today or help you understand what's going on or whatever. And so I think that's kind of cool about the courses, being able to inject a little bit of this kind of stuff, like prepping for this whole thing, prepping for the mental health piece after birth, or prepping for what happens when you and your provider don't agree, like really getting to meet moms there before they're in labor and it's a lot harder to educate or help someone in that moment. So I think in terms of mental health specifically, one thing that I don't think is talked about enough for pregnancy is that mental health things can often happen and start during pregnancy. So I feel like we talk a lot about postpartum anxiety, postpartum depression, right? The PMADS, but that P in the PMAD stands for perinatal, right? Which is the entire perinatal period. But we only, I would say 90% of the things I see, if not more, are about postpartum issues. And so one thing that I really like to talk about before you're ever in labor or before you're even in that final trimester is that, you know, the depression, the anxieties, that these things can happen in pregnancy. And if you think you're experiencing them, I feel that they often get poo-pooed as a hormonal thing, right? And it can be, right? Our hormones are all over the place.
Yeah.
But that's one thing that I like to like teach or lean into or make sure people know is that this stuff can start now. So you need to advocate for yourself and your mental health now if you are feeling off. And maybe your provider's like, hey, Lo, this sounds like classic hormonal changes in your third trimester, you know, and you believe them and you trust them, and that's great. But if that is not true, or if you need more, or you just don't agree with that, I would encourage people to like seek out another opinion or get that help, because you are a setup for postpartum issues if you are having them in pregnancy. So that's like a huge thing that I like to talk about, make sure people know, is that this actually can start in pregnancy. And this is why I think we need to talk about that whole perinatal period as you being, you know, more susceptible to possibly struggling with some mental health stuff. So that is, I would say, one of my biggest things kind of pre-labor and birth when I'm thinking about mental health. And the other one, and this applies after as well, but is just this idea of kind of like refining your boundary, your social boundaries, be that, you know, your mom, your dad, your sister, your aunt, uncle, and also the social ones on our phones, and just really narrowing in on a few voices that you want to trust. And maybe you find an influencer, an educator online. That's great. Obviously, I'm right there saying, hey, I want people to do that with me. But having just a couple of voices that you're going to choose to trust instead of opening yourself up to the massive amount of noise that exists the moment you say you're pregnant and your phone hears you, like the algorithm starts spitting at you, right?
The algorithm knows.
Oh, it's really weird how quickly the algorithm feeds you what it thinks you want. Yeah, but I think that's really protective of our mental health as well, because the overwhelm is going to set in very, very quickly with all that you feel you don't know, or you have to get ready for, or even, you know, I'm worried about mental health issues, whatever it is. So being really thoughtful about what inputs you let in and how much of those inputs you let in.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think you're right. Ashley and I talk a lot on the podcast about social media has a lot of value. It also brings a lot of that noise, which can add to all the stress and everything that's happening as you're preparing for baby. Lo, were there any tips or things that you constantly hear mothers ask that you'd want to share about kind of this pre-planning labor part of becoming a mom? Anything that you commonly see that moms have questions about, or that they may want to do, like how to better advocate for themselves? Anything along those lines?
I think one of the things that I most like to teach, again, but this is hard because it's this intangible, it's not intangible, but it's hard to practice or really think about, is this idea of advocacy, which just gets thrown around all the time, like be an advocate, be an advocate. But again, I like giving people really specific scripts. And so you can apply these in a discussion about whether or not you want an epidural. You could apply these in a discussion about whether or not your mental health feels like it's at the right place. So I like giving scripts and telling moms, encouraging them to walk into a prenatal appointment and specifically practice them. And you don't have to tell your provider, hey, I'm practicing my scripts on you. But essentially, you know, let's say one of my favorite things to teach for these prenatal appointments is asking the question at the end, hey, what's going to happen at my next appointment? And they say, oh, we're going to do the GBS screen and we're going to start checking your cervix. And you can say, okay, I'm going to go home and I'm going to learn about these things. I'm going to know what questions to ask. I'm going to come into my next appointment saying, hey, you know, I read this. I'm not totally sure about XYZ, and kind of like preemptively meeting some of the things that might come up. That's easy to do prenatally because you can ask, hey, what might happen next? And for the most part, we know until, of course, labor starts and birth starts. But that idea, it translates into labor and birth as well, where you are willing to ask the questions of, hey, do I have to make this decision right now? Or what are the alternatives to what we're discussing right now? And so, I mean, there's acronyms that go along with everything I just said, these brain tools, these things, but to truly start practicing them prenatally so you can apply them to the big and the small, labor or birth decision or whatever, intervention gets offered or suggested, and you know exactly what to say instead of just, okay, I'll trust you, which is fine if that's how you feel with your provider, you've developed that relationship. But a lot of us just don't know what to say when they say, hey, let's start this, let's do this, we're going to do this. We're kind of locked up like, okay, sounds good. And we just don't feel comfortable with that script, that return volley of what we're going to say.
Yeah. It's also wonderful practice for in the postpartum period, because so many women that I work with and that we've talked to, like they kind of knew, like they weren't feeling like themselves, they were like, I just like, this doesn't seem like me. I'm like worrying too much, or my mood is really, really low. But they were like, I don't know how to say that to somebody without either having a fear or having, you commonly hear like, oh, well, maybe it's just hormones, or people are like, yeah, this time is really hard. And then you feel dismissed. And so that's something that's come up a lot, is women encouraging new moms. Like sometimes you just you got to keep bringing it up. You have to keep saying, no, I know that something's not right. Like I know that something doesn't feel right, until there is someone who's ready to say, okay, tell me what's going on. Let's talk more about this. Because it's hard. I think you get the bravery to say something one time, and one person one time is like, it's hard. And then you're like, oh, I guess I'm never going to say anything again.
Right.
And then you suffer needlessly.
If I could speak to that as well, I have like this other little thing I teach for more postpartum mental health kind of prepping. Is I love the idea of establishing like a point person in your life for your postpartum period. Preferably, this would not be your partner or the person who's in the house helping you raise this baby, but almost like maybe it's your mom, maybe it's a really good friend, someone who's close to you, someone who knows you deeply, and who you have given the freedom to speak into your life and say, hey, I'm not sure you're okay. I want to talk about this with you. Because I think so often we blame ourselves when we don't recognize what's going on, or we can blame our partner and say, how did you not realize that I was so anxious that I wasn't leaving the house? Whatever it could be. But that's a lot of burden to put on both yourself and the other person who's parenting with you. And so I just love the idea of truly calling that best friend or whoever it might be and saying, listen, I am worried, or not worried. I know that mental health issues can come up postpartum. I want you to pay attention, and you have the right to come tell me when you're worried about me. And I'm not going to get mad. I'm going to listen. That type of conversation. Because I can't imagine. So I had significant postpartum anxiety after my second baby. And I just can't imagine if a friend had come to me, or if I'd done this prior. I had not. And if they had said that to me, one, I would hope that I would have listened, and I would have gotten help so much sooner, because I needed some help. Absolutely. But there was no one paying attention. And that's not a dig at my husband, nor my friends. But sometimes if you don't specifically ask and say, I'm going to let you speak into my life like this, people aren't going to. And it's not because they don't love you or they don't notice. They just think that's not my place. So I say, make it somebody's place. Tell someone it is your place, and I want you to do this for me. If you have someone like that in your life.
That's a great point. And I love having it being someone outside of your household, because a lot of times we think our partner's going to be that person, but they're in it with us, right? They're also struggling with sleep deprivation and everything else. So having that best friend or parent, whomever, is a great idea.
Yeah. And it brings it up to that person's, it kind of brings it up higher in their level of awareness, right? Like you ask for them to be, can you be aware of this? Can you kind of let me know? So then it is a little more top of mind for them, rather than seeing a friend who's tired and you're like, oh yeah, that's happened to me too.
It's tough. Yeah.
They might be like, oh, maybe, well, hey, like, how are you doing? Like, you have seemed really tired. Like, you told me to check on you. I want to check on you. And it's just the space for you to say, like, you know what, you're right. Or No, it's just today. I really have been feeling pretty good so
Yep.
far. It's just the past couple of days. So
Yeah.
I really like that. That's
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Well,
And I
let me
think not, go ahead.
Let me ask this. So a lot of that was talking about planning for labor,
Yeah.
right? Getting set up, practicing your script, having your point person. Is there anything a mom can do during the birthing process to improve her outcomes when it's related to mental health? Anything that you see or recommend during that actual process she's in the hospital?
Yeah. So I'm going to scoot you forward to like a couple weeks before the birth process and say,
Perfect.
Yeah.
which is, of course, I'm going to say this because I'm a birth educator, but birth education, like good comprehensive education, has been proven in multiple pieces of research to positively change outcomes in a ton of ways in labor and birth, including with both like occurrence of and then degree of any mental health issue. And so obviously I'm a massive proponent of this birth education because it changed, and I'm talking about outcomes even like degree of tearing, less likelihood of
Mm,
induction, higher rates of satisfaction with your birth, less fear and anxiety about the process. There's probably like 8 or 9 outcomes that get looked at all the time, and 4 to 5 of them are often really tangible, like lower rate of C-section or lower rate of induction, like really clinical looking. But the
yeah.
other ones are often ones like greater bonding with the baby, more satisfaction between you and your partner. And of course, all of those types of outcomes are likely going to bless us or benefit us mental health in our mental health as a whole.
Yeah.
And so I think that it can't be said enough that this type of education can literally change your story. And so I think that's why it's such a gift that there's so many people out there trying to help. And then we have to kind of do our due diligence to figure out, what kind of education can we seek out? What can we have? What can we afford? What does that look like for us? But truly, truly acknowledging that that type of education will impact the way we move through our labor and birth, regardless of what does or does not happen. And then, of course, whatever comes in postpartum as well. And I think that when we have that good, broad, focused education, it really sets us up to handle, what may come in labor and birth better. So good education does not mean you won't have an instrumental delivery, or you won't have an unplanned C-section, or you won't have whatever some of these things are you don't want. But I believe that it does set you up when those things come, that maybe your provider says, hey, I need to do an episiotomy for XYZ reason. And you're going to say, I know exactly what an episiotomy is. I know the risks and benefits of it. I know what questions to ask right now. You're just going to be really familiar with whatever the unknown is, or maybe whatever it was that was scaring you about the process. And I think that familiarity from good education then sets you up to be, I don't want to say okay and like dismiss hard situations in birth, but to feel more safe, to feel more heard
Mm-hmm.
inside of those birth experiences that don't go well, which ultimately does lead to a better processing of whatever did or didn't happen post birth, because you do not feel like it happened to you. You feel like I was in this, I was
Yeah.
part of this. So
Yeah.
I think that stems all from really good
Mm-hmm.
education. So,
Well, it gives you a greater sense of control over
right,
what's going on, right? Because at least you know what's happening, you know the terminology, you know what could or couldn't happen. And I think sometimes birth and the postpartum period and mental health in general, people are, they're like, well, I don't want to scare you, or I don't want to.
right,
And I'm like, but it's not, like, it's just information. And if you know what is possible, what's not possible, what's realistic, what's not realistic, it just puts you in a place of being like better informed when you're trying to make a decision.
right,
Because I tell, Kelly and I will tell women all the time, like, this isn't to scare you when we're talking about, all the PMADs and different
right,
ways to prepare and symptoms and signs and that kind of thing. It's not to scare you, but it's to know that, oh, if you see it in yourself, your friend, your sister, you're like, hey, I think I've heard about this before.
for
This is
sure.
a thing. Here's someone you can reach out to for help immediately, rather than it getting to a point where it's so obvious that you've been suffering, that's when you're seeking help.
Right,
And yeah, I love, information and just the storytelling and sharing like this. Again, it's like, I'm always like, it's not to scare you. It's just
right.
to make you better informed so that you are more aware of like what's going on and you just know how to help people.
And I think that's part of that like due diligence too, both in pregnancy and postpartum, of like listening to the right people, because there are people who will, it's more of a scare tactic, or it
Right.
is more of a slant, right? Like that more biased information about this is how it will go if you don't XYZ
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I think, yeah, I also feel like I understand people who really focus on the one way they would like things to be, because that's part of, like setting that goal and really looking at like, this is what I want and this is what I want to work towards. And I'm going to surround myself with that positive, information and affirmation about what I'm hoping for. But that broader perspective, education and thought, I really always go back to, because I just don't want you to end up scared if you're faced with something you had not planned for. Or if someone does try to scare you, you can say, actually, I know what you're talking about. And I know, the pros and the cons. And so that doesn't have to be scary if I have all this information to make the choice. So I think that can be tough sometimes with social media and such, is you get a lot of slants and a lot of biases. And sometimes they're helpful when you just want to be really committed and all into what you believe in. But it can also set you up sometimes to not be ready to handle if things perhaps don't go exactly the way, that you were really dreaming of and, holding on to. So it can be tough.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask this. We're going to cut this because I just completely forgot my question. I guess so.
You're okay, Kelly.
Right at 4 minutes. Sorry about this. I just brain gone. Motherhood, we've got 4 minutes left. So before I say go back on again, do we want to do any like last minute tips that you have? And then I'd love if we ask you to kind of do a plug for what you do so that moms can find you and resources, if you're okay with that.
Yeah, I'm peeking out this last question you had asked to see if we.
Was on
So
there.
you had asked me, being a postpartum mom is challenging even without like a PMAD. Any tips to help them in that phase feel more confident and secure? So we could chat about that for a little bit.
Okay.
Like a couple of things I could say.
Okay, potted ties, please pick back up right here. So Lo, let me ask you this. So being a postpartum mom can really be challenging, even if you aren't suffering from postpartum depression and anxiety. What tips do you have for moms that can help them in this phase feel more confident and secure?
Yeah. So we already talked about my one thing, which is like getting down and getting those few voices that are allowed to speak into your life, cultivating your social media feeds, whatever that looks like. So I think that's super valuable. So continue to do it in labor, birth, and throughout your whole motherhood journey, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And one of my other favorite tips is, whether it be, before your provider discharges you from home from the hospital, if you're having hospital birth, or even at like a 6-week or maybe a 4-week appointment that you may have, ask your provider who your points of contact are moving forward. So I actually recently had a baby, and at my 6-week appointment, I asked my provider, hey, who do I call for XYZ after I walk out of this room? I wanted to know, like, if I'm struggling with mental health, do I call you, or am I supposed to call my GP? If I think I have a UTI, do I call you or do I call my GP? And just really figuring out who your clinical points of contact are for, if there's a few things that you're concerned about, maybe pelvic floor, maybe you have the abdominal separation, that diastasis, like whatever it is that you're worried about, know who you're going to call, so that should any of these things become worse, or you're more bothered by something, that you know exactly what provider is going to be able to see you and welcome you in and help you with whatever that is. So that's a really big thing that I love to teach. I kind of teach it for that like 6-week appointment, but if you can clarify those things even earlier, that's great too. So I'm trying to think if I have anything else that we haven't spoken to specifically. I think that's it.
Any questions or things like you wish that we had asked, or something you anything we need to touch on?
This is not a question, but I think it's nice to hear the like, hey, me too sometimes. So like I said, I'm a nurse. I know all these things. And with my second baby, I floundered around with postpartum anxiety for months before I asked for help. And I share that simply to say, I think we take on a lot of shame, and we're like, oh, we knew this could happen, and I still let myself do it. And I had the same things. Like, I've got to take care of my baby. I'm tired. I don't have time to go see someone. I should just be able to get through this on my own. And so that's just more of a solidarity. Like, should you find yourself in that place with whatever, be it a PMAT or something else, this isn't because you're being silly or, if you were a nurse, you'd do it better or whatever. It's not, it's hard. This stuff is hard. And even when it's really good, really lovely, it's really hard to do the right thing for yourself sometimes. So just to encourage you in that, you are not alone in feeling like you did it wrong or you're doing it wrong sometimes.
That is a great reminder. And Lo, can you tell all of our listeners how to find you? You talked a lot about, the birth education. If they're looking for content, can you tell them where you are and what you offer?
Yeah. So I'm basically the labor mama. I spell mama, M-A-M-A, on not all platforms, because I tried to get into TikTok and was like, I can't do TikTok. So it's the labor mama on Instagram, Pinterest. My website is www.thelabormama.com. And there's a blog that's constantly added to there for just free resource for those of you who like to read and research. Instagram is a mix of education and then just being a mama. I have 4 kids. I don't know if I even mentioned that. And so there's a lot of just real life happening combined with, intentional education happening in there, little snippets for free that I can share and that I want to talk about in stories and stuff like that. So those are probably the 3 places I'm most showing up where you can find stuff from me.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. I know it's so helpful for all of our listeners out there just to learn, have more information about pregnancy, labor, postpartum. It's all related. It's all part of the whole journey that is motherhood. So it's just the beginning, really. But
it really is. Well, thank you for having me. You guys are doing a beautiful thing. So nice to be a part of it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
If you enjoyed this episode and found it helpful, please be sure to hit subscribe, leave us your feedback, and give us a 5-star review. For even more support, visit us at wethrivepostpartum.com/podcast to sign up for our newsletter and learn more about our community. Remember, you are not alone. With support, you can feel better. Together, let's thrive postpartum.